Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar, How to Hire Mobile App Developers. I'm really glad you guys are here today joining the live webinar, which is really cool because you have an opportunity to ask questions. And this is actually the kind of presentation or seminar or workshop I like most, when people ask questions and then I just respond to those questions as far as I know. And in the future, I'll be also inviting other technical leaders to join these webinars, and also technical recruiters, senior technical recruiters, to join these webinars to share some of the experience, best practices, and tools that they use on a daily basis. So before we jump to the topic, I would like to just give you a brief overview. Why are we doing this whole geek recruiter thingy? Let me introduce myself first. So I'm the host and one of the instructors of the Geek Recruiter Academy. So Geek Recruiter has an academy, Geek Recruiter Academy, where we explain the technologies. Because in the past, I was a CTO myself in a fast-growing startup in Southeast Asia, and I actually realized how easy it is for a technical person to recruit developers, software developers, while it's super difficult for someone who hasn't been really coding, someone who hasn't led any technical team. So in general, recruiters lack that technical understanding, and as a result cannot really talk to developers on the same level, cannot have a meaningful small talk discussion. And eventually, developers are really annoyed to in general speak to recruiters who cannot really speak on the same level as they can. So that was the thought behind the Geek Recruiter Academy. Hey, how can we bridge these two worlds? How can we teach recruiters the technologies so they can understand and eventually hire developers with confidence, hire more developers, hire them faster, approach them on LinkedIn with some clear message, which would indicate that they know what they are talking about. So we've started the Geek Recruiter Academy with a set of courses that actually teach the foundation topics, the key terms, and then how to use the terms for as a conversation starter. To have meaningful discussions with developers. And then we build on it courses like how to hire Java developers, how to hire data engineers, how to, where to source them, how to interview, how to assess, all these things that recruiters, especially, those who hire technical positions, need to do on a daily basis, and still may struggle with it even after years of doing it. But then still, I think this is just the beginning of your journey as a technical recruiter. Because if I get back to the role of a CTO that I was for several years, I want someone who is a business partner to me, not just someone who processes job descriptions, because there is very limited value, right? But I want someone who can bring added value to the business, someone who can even advise, like, hey, this team setup makes sense, this doesn't make sense, why don't you use remote teams? Hey, we can combine it with 3 remote developers and 2 on-site and 1 project manager. And like someone who can be a business partner. And I think technical recruiters can get to a level where they are full end-to-end partners of technical leaders, IT directors, CTOs, and that's where I think we aim to get you guys. But first, we need to start with technical understanding. We need to start with the basics, like, hey, where do you find PHP developers? How do you attract Java developers, and so on, right? And then we build up on that foundation. All right. So with that, let me jump straight to the topic: how to hire mobile app developers. And actually, this is a huge topic itself. If I just think about some of the courses which we have inside the Geek Recruiter Academy, this is a full course, right, that discusses this topic. So we cannot really cover it all, but we can at least break it down to smaller chunks. So you see what are some of the gaps you can fill, and maybe we can have a few really hands-on areas, maybe some conversation starters maybe a few questions to ask either a hiring manager or a developer when you are hiring. All right, so let's dive right in. Oh, and I forgot to mention, guys, that as soon as you have a question, then feel free to ask me in the chat. There is a chat somewhere on the right. At least I see it on the right. So you should also see a chat button. So type there any question you may have. I also collect questions that you guys enter when signing up for a webinar. So I'll also be answering some of those. All right, if we still have time. And I'm also happy to cover questions you have during this webinar. So just add them to the chat box and I will respond as long as I know. All right, so how to hire mobile developers? It's important to realize who, what are we really talking about? Like, what are mobile apps and how can mobile apps be built? Okay, so first, let me explain this part. Mobile apps. Like the first option, native. So if you have a client, well, the first thing, hey, are you looking for someone to build native apps? iOS, Android, what kind of apps? iOS or Android apps or Microsoft apps? What kind of apps do you actually, I mean, not you as a recruiter, but your client needs to build? Or second, are you looking for hybrid apps? And now this may be a little confusing for those of you who have never built any mobile applications. It's important to realize that hybrid apps also build native apps. Well, this may be confusing. How can I explain it? Well, the hybrid, in fact, means that you build a cross-platform application that, for example, iOS or Android, you just start with a generic language, for example, JavaScript, right? So let me put it here. So you use JavaScript. You use a framework, for example, Ionic or React Native or Titanium. All right, so we can use all these frameworks. Ionic, React Native, there is a huge hype around React Native recently. Titanium, right? Titanium Accelerator, again, one of the frameworks. And there are more like PhoneGap. Some of them are, well, I shouldn't say obsolete, but they are getting obsolete, while some of them are really trending and hype, like React Native, for example. So Titanium, we've actually used Titanium in my previous company. That was already 7 years ago when we were building an MVP, and we used Titanium to build that kind of MVP. So again, coming back to what does it mean hybrid? So hybrid means that you use JavaScript programming language with one of these frameworks. All right, so do I have green? Yeah, I have green. So this is a that's not green. Language. These are frameworks. All right. Oh, maybe you cannot see it. Let me shift a little. Okay, so JavaScript is a language. Frameworks are, for example, Ionic, React Native, Titanium, PhoneGap. All right. So these are the frameworks that you can use in JavaScript to build the cross-platform application. And then what does it actually mean cross-platform? So on a timeline, say this is a timeline. Here you have an idea, right? And the idea could be, hey, let's build an application that will book a hotel or book a table in a restaurant. Okay, and then you start developing it, say, as a hybrid application. So here you develop it, and then at some point you say, wow, now it's great. Now this is a good application. So let's let's ship it. Let's ship it to end users. So somewhere here you say, oh, well, it's good. And then you ship to either iOS or to Android store. Okay, iOS or Android web store. Okay, is this part clear? So you actually generate from JavaScript an application, a native application is generated. All right, so the code is compiled and a native application is generated. Well, here developers write native application. You know, they use the native language by default. They on day one they start writing the application in the native language. So here the timeline would look like this. You have an idea, you start building the app, and then you ship it either to iOS or to Android. All right, and here you ship it because you already started writing the application in the native language. Okay, and now what is the native language? Well, for each platform, the native language is slightly different, right? Is everything clear, guys? If not, feel free to ask in the chat box. Let me briefly look if there are no questions. Nothing particular yet. I'm just saying hello. Okay, hello. So looking at, for example, iOS, the iOS platform, right? Like iOS is Apple, in other words. So iOS is an operating system. Apple is the brand everyone knows, right? And iPhone is a mobile phone. iPad is a tablet. So iOS is the operating system, and the operating system uses two languages. So one could be or is Objective-C, and the second one is Swift. All right, Objective-C and Swift. Can you see it? All right, historically, Objective-C was dominant for, I don't know, for 10 years or so, right when the first iPhone was released with iOS operating system. You know, all the apps were built using Objective-C programming language. And recently, it was maybe 2015, 16 or so, or maybe 17. Well, I would need to look it up. Cannot remember. Apple released Swift as an open source programming language that is supported by iOS operating system. And something similar happened with Android. So Android, obviously Java and Kotlin. So historically, Java was the only language you could use to build a mobile application for Android operating system. And then Google pushed Kotlin as a new standard for Android applications. Well, obviously Java still works and it will work for several years, but Kotlin is more and more prevalent for Android development. All right, and here Microsoft, obviously C# as a programming language. They have, for example, a .NET framework as a framework that is already on the market for several years. And the .NET Core is now in version, I think, 2.2, which is the newer one. .NET Core is also a framework, but it's used just recently. And then you have a framework that actually is also, well, in other words, there is a trend to build cross-platform applications because it has clear benefits. Everything has some pros and cons, and building cross-platform applications is also a way for Microsoft to push their operating systems to mobile phones or smartphones, right? So they also these days push the boundaries in terms of cross-platform mobile app development. But for now, we would focus on iOS, Android, because that anyway takes the majority of development focus and power. And hybrid applications are actually a big thing with JavaScript and some of these frameworks that we've mentioned. All right, now, so this is the very high level background you guys need to understand, especially when you have a discussion with a hiring manager, because then it needs to be clear, hey, are we looking for a developer to build a hybrid application or a native application? If native application, then are you looking for someone who builds only iOS or only Android application? So I would be asking a hiring manager, for example, hey, do you have a dedicated team that only builds iOS application, and then another dedicated team that only builds Android application? Or would you rather have a cross-platform team working with JavaScript? Like these kind of things you can ask, or you should ask a hiring manager. All right, I have some notes here actually, guys, but feel free to ask me questions. And if you don't have any questions, I'll go through some of the notes I have here. So we could literally discuss, and then dive deeper to how to source, where to find developers, where to find, for example, those hybrid developers. And here you could see immediately some keywords, right? As soon as someone has, for example, on LinkedIn, Ionic, then you know that this person builds hybrid applications using JavaScript, all right, JavaScript language. So this also gives you some toolbox in terms of keywords. It's also important to realize that that it's relatively easy. Well, it's not super easy, but it's relatively easy to just change from one framework to another. A developer who works for 3 years with Titanium can relatively easy learn how to work with PhoneGap framework or Ionic. So even if a company, your client, works with, for example, Ionic, you can still search for someone who works for 3 years with Titanium, and maybe that person is already tired of Titanium framework and is looking forward to shift to, for example, work with Ionic or React Native. Often developers don't care if they work with React Native or Ionic. It depends on the client, what kind of technology, what kind of framework do they use. So say if there would be a client looking for a React Native developer, and I cannot really find anyone in our database or on LinkedIn or in your connections, then I would start, for example, searching for someone who works with PhoneGap. And the developers who work with PhoneGap are, at least from my experience, already a little, tired of PhoneGap, and especially in my eyes, this technology is a little obsolete. Maybe not everyone would agree, but it's just sentiment. So often developers want to shift from PhoneGap to something cool and hot, and the cool and hot thing in this area is, for example, React Native. So if I cannot find anyone with React Native experience who's free on the market, I look for someone who works with Ionic, and I try to change him or shift him, or even motivate him to, for example, work with React Native. And again, one of the questions, one of the topics we talk about inside the Geek Academy is how to attract developers, how to motivate them to join another company. And this is precisely one of the examples, right? You may know that, for example, someone is burned out of using PhoneGap for the last few years, or Titanium is going downhill, or maybe Ionic is not as cool as it used to be years ago. So these guys are looking forward to change, looking for some really cool opportunity, and the cool opportunity could be React Native, because there is lots of hype around React Native recently. All right. So as a technical recruiter, you need to know what is cool, what is trending, and how to identify developers who are in a segment that is getting tired of that particular technology. which could be phone gap or titanium. Okay, so we could actually draw here some little arrows like this and this, and this is just the sentiment. I'm not saying that the phone gap is totally going downhill, not at all. This is just the sentiment, right? And next to React Native, I could draw an arrow like this, where the sentiment is increasing. All right, does it make sense? Cool. Next, I would be, well, there are just so many topics we could talk about, but let's at least cover one or two more. All right, which could be, you know, a concept of a full stack developer. And like, obviously you guys know who is a full stack developer in backend development, right? Or, it's not just backend, it's backend, front end, database and everything. But what does it mean in terms of mobile app development? So again, I'm looking at this through the lenses of someone who was leading a technical team, both backend and front end and mobile apps and everything. And I've noticed some interesting pattern. So how could I draw it like this? Okay. So here is backend. So here is a mobile application. Although iPhones don't have this this button here anymore, but it's a nice emo like icon. So say this is an application, right? And they communicate through some API, application programming interface. And then the backend communicates with a database and third-party service through an API again. Okay, and the application could also communicate with some analytical tool. The analytical tool can answer questions like, hey, how many daily active users we have? What do they do in the mobile application? What kind of buttons do they click? What kind of screens do they visit? Okay, that's analytical tool. And it could also have some local storage, some database. So say this is the database, local database, all right? This is the remote database. And this is a local database on the storage. So maybe I should not draw it like this. Say this is just the dotted line indicating it's on the device. This is remote in the cloud, and this is on the device. So now you usually have a mobile developer who builds this application, all right? So it could be iOS developer or an Android developer or Microsoft developer, or there used to be BlackBerry years ago. And here you have lots of different small tasks. Starting with someone needs to analyze the application. Someone needs to do with the architecture. Organize and take care of the architecture design. Someone needs to take care of user experience, user interface design, and so on. Okay, so in a smaller team, this could be literally just one person. In a smaller team, one person can take care of like everything, starting with user interface design. I'll write it here: UI/UX. Even project management. It could be user interaction, like obviously coding, but the coding is just the base. Okay, so the way I look at it is the coding is what any junior developer can learn. A junior developer can learn to code mobile apps within maybe 6 months, maybe within a year. But then all these things, increase the seniority of a developer. So the more applications the developer codes, the more he or she learns about UI, UX, user interaction, how to get feedback from the customer. So this is not just a seniority, but I also look at it as a way to say either specialize or be a full stack mobile app developer. And by the full stack, I mean, don't get confused with a full stack, backend front-end development. This is literally just for the sake of this discussion and this webinar, like someone who, say it's one person who develops an application and needs to, say, analyze it. I need to write here, so someone who analyzes the data. And for example, our team in my previous company analyzed the performance of the mobile application. So the developers were going through the data, through the analytical tools, charts, dashboards, to figure out which parts of the applications are used, are not used anymore. And they were coming up with solutions how to improve the application. So the developers were really senior, but they also were full stack in terms of the application development and management. Just because our team was small, we are talking about 3-4 people taking care of the application. But sometimes in a larger team, you have people who are dedicated to roles such as project management for the application. You have a product owner, you have a business analyst, you have a customer understanding specialist, someone who only interacts with users and processes the feedback. So the larger the company, the more specialized the roles, obviously, right? And in a smaller company, say in a startup, sometimes a developer also needs to adjust the backend. So this is actually also something I've seen in our smaller app development team. Like they also took care of part of the backend system. And this was exciting for them because they no longer had to wait for the backend team to develop some API so they can list something on the backend, but they just did it themselves. And again, looking at different types of companies, for example, or this could be one of the selling points for you guys when you are hiring a developer to a smaller company. You can possibly mention this as one of the benefits, like, hey, you can take care of part of the backend system if you want. If you want to upskill in this kind of coding area, software development area, then this is an opportunity for you. This will most likely never happen in a bigger corporation, in a large company, because the roles are specialized. But in a small company, this could totally be possible. And I've seen it firsthand, myself, where one app developer was not just coding. Like coding is the basis, but he was also interacting with users. He was responsible for project management. He was he was not a designer, but he joined UI and UX meetings to give feedback. So he was involved in the UI UX process. He analyzed data, and then at some point he also adjusted the backend API. So that was, or at least in my eyes, this is a full stack mobile app developer. This could certainly be an interesting selling point. In fact, in my case, as a CTO, that was a selling point when we were hiring developers. This is what I presented. I was like, wow, this is so cool. I can learn about the backend. I can learn about the app. I can learn how to analyze data. I can learn, I could be part of the design process and so on. So that was really cool, and they enjoyed it. However, as I said, it depends on the company you hire the developers for. Now, before we wrap it up, it's more than 30 minutes already, but before we wrap it up, I would like to just mention a few questions I would ask a hiring manager. Like this would certainly be one of them. I would ask, like, hey, how open are you for the developer to join some of these areas? How likely he or she is to adjust the backend system? Can he build his or her own APIs? Yes or no? If yes, great, you have one more selling point. I would certainly ask how many applications the developer will be working on. I think this is important because well, let me draw it first. So say, again, this is the timeline with here, it's time. And say you have an agency as an example company. So here a developer joins a company and say here, so this is an agency and this is a startup. So say product-centric startup, where product-centric means they have their own product, they support, they build for 1, 2, 3, 4 years. The product could be the mobile application, like I don't know, Uber is one of the applications that they built their app for years. And an agency gets a project, they build it, they ship it. They build it, they ship it. They get a job, they build it, they ship it. They build it, they ship it. They build it, they ship it. So they never go too deep in terms of how the application works. They have a requirement, hey, build this app for us and deliver it by this and the date. If they do it, fine, job well done. But in a product-centric startup, the developers start building it, and they build it, and they build it, and they build it, and soon they are off the chart. So so soon they are off the chart, because the more they build, the complexity increases, the depth of knowledge increases, and they also need to focus on, say, slightly different tasks than an agency. Like here, an agency ships the product and off they go. But here, they need to, as I mentioned, for example, analyze the performance. They need to adjust. They need to interact with customers. So here, they have customer interaction. The customers maybe say, hey, we don't like this screen because whatever. So they redesign it. They come up with a new screen. So the developers live with the product for even 2-3 years. They come every day to work thinking, hey, how can we improve it? What kind of data can we analyze? And this certainly is again important to ask the hiring manager, like, what kind of a company are you? Are you an agency? How deep do you go? How many applications our developer will be working on? Just one, or one every quarter? And then you can ask follow-up questions, like, for example, will he or she support the application after it is released? Here in this case, like, obviously we need to support, a startup needs to support the application because that's the product that they sell. Then I would be asking about the team. Is the team larger? Is the team just one person who works both on the iOS application or Android application, or are there some seniors? Is there anyone to learn from in the iOS or Android mobile team? Okay, what else? Certainly, I would be asking about the requirements. Like, hey, how deep do you require the developer to go? Do you only take care of the coding part, and do you have product managers, project managers, designers, and all the stuff? Or the designer or the developer is required to do part of these tasks? I would be asking about the technical stack. Developers these days want to first avoid legacy systems, and second, work in environments where the best practices are well set in place, right? So a developer doesn't really want to join a team where, on a scale from 0 to 10, they would rank on, say, 3 out of 10, but rather 9 out of 10, where now the question is, what is 9 out of 10? So it could be that continuous integration process setup, automated testing, automated deployments. This is actually even possible in mobile development world. So certainly something you should be asking the hiring manager, hey, how far are you in terms of adopting best practices? And then you can sell it to the developer. All right. I think we could wrap it up. There is just so much more we could talk about, right? How to, or where to find them, how to source them, how to interview, what kind of questions to ask. But we don't really have that much time. And just a while ago, I also answered one of the questions. I just forgot to mention it, but thanks for the question about the what I call a full stack mobile app developer. So what are some additional skills required for a senior developer? Was the question. All right, so wrap it up. Let's wrap it up here. I'm really glad you guys joined this webinar. We have a question. We have time for one more question before we need to wrap it up. I'm just waiting for you guys if you ask. If not, then we will wrap it up. There's no time to waste, especially in this really fast evolving environment, right? I cannot underestimate the importance of say being or learning continuously about the technologies, about the technical stuff, because that's how you attract developers. You attract developers if you speak their language, and you can speak their language if you understand the technical terms, if you know how to start a conversation, if you can ask a question or two about Stack Overflow, if you can derive some value from their GitHub profile and then mention something in a linked message. This is something technical leaders do on a daily basis, and this is something you guys as a technical recruiter still can learn with ease. This is something we teach inside the academy. So I encourage you guys to join the academy, to learn how to become the best recruiter, the best technical recruiter in town. And this is something we talk about inside the academy. We organize webinars like this one to help you understand the technologies, help you understand the technical landscape. And then, we dive deeper, how to attract developers, where to find them, how to source them, how to approach them on LinkedIn, how to write a good job description to attract the developer, how to remove the fluff and focus only on what matters in a job description. So all the great, cool stuff, everything is available literally for a very, very little fee. It's only $89 per month, which is literally nothing. If we only help you get one developer per month and you get commission, then it's just mind-blowing. And I think we can totally help you get at least one developer because you immediately get on the same wavelength as the developers. So that's only what I can recommend to you. And second, I would suggest you guys are active, ask questions, send us some of the job descriptions you struggle with or some of the roles you struggle with. Like one of the members just recently with SAP role, ABAP language, and this is something we immediately start working on. Like, hey, how can we help this recruiter with what he struggles with, and then we release the content as a part of the Geek Recruiter Academy course base. All right, so with that, let's wrap it up here. I wish you a wonderful day. And I will talk to you soon again, I think next Wednesday at 11. Have a wonderful day. Cheers.